Please permit me to welcome the second distinguished speaker. You've been hearing from him all this while, but now he's going to be making a formal presentation. The title of the presentation is Resolving Perennial Conflicts in the Crude Oil and Gas-Rich Ekpetiama Kingdom, a case study of the Agudama Ekpetiama Impasse. And this is going to be presented by His Royal Majesty, King Bubaraye Dakolo. He is the Agada IV of the Kingdom of Ekpetiama. He's from Bayelsa State of Nigeria. Your Royal Highness, please welcome.
So good morning, everyone. You will join me in a few traditional rites so that we can be on the same page. Izon. You have to say hi. Izon. Izon. Izon, come at me. Very good. Thank you very much. Well, traditionally that is done just to put us on the same page, just to charge us. I won't be doing this. I will just focus here. Yes. I am not an academic, but I've been a practitioner of what I'm going to talk about today. Resolving perennial conflicts in the crude oil and gas-rich Ekpetiama Kingdom. A case study of Agudama, Ekpetiama. Ekpetiama is a small kingdom in Bayelsa State, but oil-rich, very rich in oil and gas. As we speak now, it produces about 60,000 barrels of crude oil every day, which translates to several hundreds of millions of dollars. Agudama is a place that has had an impasse for about 15 years. They had some small conflicts that were not resolvable. And so if you follow me through this journey, you will quickly understand where we stand. A bit of the geography is necessary. Agudama is one of the 7 communities located along the non-river bank of the oil and gas-rich region of Bayelsa State. Agudama itself is, all the communities in Ekpetiama are located around the non-river. So Agudama is on Wilberforce Island, which is a very beautiful island, evergreen island with tall trees and forests. It's extremely beautiful. Centuries-old flora and fauna are largely still intact, except in areas already bulldozed for modern roads and housing, or those cleared for oil and gas operations, and recently by the state government for our lone airport project. The population is about 3,000 people. That's for that community, and there are 3 compounds, namely Ewereware, Olomoware, and Oyekeware. History of the conflict. On the 23rd day of December 1972, they got a new traditional ruler, and he reigned for 30 years and died on the first day of December 2002. His deputy started acting immediately and acted up till 2004, when agitation started for a substantive Ibenanaowei to be installed. Until then, they were using unwritten constitution. There was no written constitution. We're not very literate in terms of the Western, so we are more of oral people. So the process of drafting a constitution commenced in 2004. Constitution Committee was inaugurated democratically, and everyone started participating in the constitution process. On the 10th day of February 2005, about a year after, the draft constitution was read and adopted in the community town hall. And this process generated agitations of all types, which eventually brought in the government of Bayelsa State as mediators. Well, that wasn't successful. However, on the 25th of May 2005, the adopted constitution was presented to the Agudama people. At the same time, a transition committee was also inaugurated. And of course, that means dissolving every structure that was left in the community and allowing the transition committee to go about its job of getting a new Ibenanaowei. Ibenanaowei is actually a community leader. This new transition committee was accepted by the acting chief, who was the deputy of the late man, and about 85% of the people, but a very small minority said no, they were not happy with it. However, an ELECO, which is electoral body, was inaugurated as well. And the ELECO went about trying to get everything right for an election. So they used the local town crier to town cry around the community that the conditions for the elections. And the small 15% also went about town crying as well, asking their supporters to boycott the elections. They went on radio to protest, asking everyone not to be part of the elections. However, the elections held, and so on the 9th of July 2005, the elections held, and on the 12th of July 2005, the new chief, the new Ibenanaowei, was installed. Well, that means many more conflicts. So the state government was accused of bias. Court cases were quickly filed by those aggrieved. And so several cases of fisticuffs, which later degenerated to reasonable scale violence, also occurred. There were arrests and counter-arrests initiated by the two factions. As the days went by, more cases were filed and numerous persons charged for different criminal breaches. A particular civil suit was against the new chief to make sure that he does not sit on the throne. Eventually, the court determined in September 2012 that he was never a chief before, not even for a minute. And so before the law, he was never ever a chief. However, he felt he was. And so there were more problems. The court determined that the former chief's, the late chief's old cabinet should reign on. And of course, it didn't take too long. I think at that time, the deputy chief himself had died. Okay, the man who acted initially had died. But the court said that council should still reign because nature abhors vacuum. So that led to more crisis. 85% were now against the 15% because they felt, well, when we won the elections and were reigning, you did not support us. You were against us. So we too will not respect you. So they actually did not respect the new cabinet, and which was not a good thing at all. 85% saying no to you, ignoring you. When you sound the gong to Agada, nobody will come, and so on and so forth. So this lingered for as long as possible. But while this was going on, crude oil and gas activities got to an all-time high in 2004 and 2005 as SPDC commenced the exploitation of their largest African offshore facility in that area. Of course, the implication is more money was also flowing in. So there was every reason why everyone should hold on to power because there was more access, there was supposed to be more access to finances when you're in charge. So the issues that perhaps could have been easily waved aside were no longer so easy to wave aside. So it went on. Unprecedented opportunities, of course, presented unprecedented inflow of financial resources and equivalent community infrastructural development projects in the Ekpetiama and Bubaraye kingdoms, of which Agudama was one of such. So between 2005, when the ousted Ibenanaowei was elected, and 2012, when the court annulled his reign, those community members who were opposed to him and his reign never recognized him as Ibenanaowei, and so never obeyed him. So the court verdict essentially flipped the positions, and so 85% were now disobeying, more like civil disturbance, just ignoring him. They were not going against the law per se, but it's my right not to gather when you say we should gather. Who are you for court to tell you that you are our chief, and so on and so forth. So till this day, he calls himself Chairman of Chiefs Council. He refused to say he's Ibenanaowei because it's actually not. So the Ibenanaowei also does not address him as such. The loyalists of the former Ibenanaowei argue that they did not get the cooperation of the current community administrators and their supporters during their time, so they too will not give them theirs. Previous attempts at resolving the conflict. Yes, for 15 years there were several attempts, and these include innumerable trips to the police stations in the whole region, so from the state to beyond the state to even Benin. And then several cases in court, civil and criminal trials. And then a lot of trips to the mortuary. I hope you know what the mortuary is. It's a lot of trips to the mortuary to either secure the dead or retrieve the dead. So there are a lot of people who also died in the process. So these attempts did not quite see the light of day. That's why they lingered for 15 years. But when His Royal Majesty King Bubaraye Dakolo was enthroned as Ibenanaowei of Ekpetiama Kingdom in 2016, mutual suspicion and rancor was at its peak amongst the Agudama people, because there are a lot of failures in the past. So with this new king, how will it be? So, of course, the rancors were there, but, I mean, will this man be able to handle this issue? Is he going to be biased? Is he going to play a trick or something? Is he going to support one side, and so on and so forth? And for a king who himself is from that place, he's already used to the people. He knows the people. He has friends amongst them and so on, even family members. But fully determined to resolve the embroilo, he initiated discussions with all groups in the community, the polarized and non-polarized alike, for a few months after settling in. Consultations were extended to persons in the other Ekpetiama Kingdom communities who had relevant information about the conflict. Several formal and informal sessions were held with the king at the palace of Agada the Fourth. Relevant materials such as court rulings and judgments were presented from all sides to buttress their claims. The materials and the oral evidence were carefully studied before the king resolved to bring them together for the first time in a long time to his palace. So a date was taken which was mutually agreed, 17th day of April 2018. And about 80 persons gathered at the palace. The days and hours before the meeting were made so tense by speculations and rumors of outcomes that would be unfavorable and biased. Interestingly, all parties were involved in these speculations or speculative outcome peddling. So both sides were feeling the king may have taken sides and the outcome was not going to be favorable. In fact, some even called the king a few minutes to the time to say, we're already aware that the outcome is against us because you've taken sides and blah, blah, blah. But they were all encouraged to come, and somehow they all came for that meeting. So the king addressed the august gathering of about 80 persons. And this were paraphrasing, quoting him directly. So the courts in September 2012 annulled Happy Obotobo's election as Ibenanaowei, that's the name of the man that was chief at the time. So in front of the law and before us as law-abiding citizens of Agudama, we must acknowledge that he was not, and never was he a chief even for a second. So he is like any other person in Agudama who is not and has never been Ibenanaowei. This implies that even if he is being addressed as chief, and that may have happened a couple of times, that does not and cannot mean that he was a former Ibenanaowei. So before the law, he was never anything. He was just like everyone else. And so if someone calls him a chief, just don't take it to heart. It's just a joke. It's like a wife calling the husband president. You can call your husband anything, president, king, and so on, you know. Okay, so you can hear it. So the chief, and then the new committee, the council that was holding sway, Chiefs Bubaraye Gecko was chairman of Agudama Council, that, and this has been affirmed, okay, and reaffirmed by the court. So that legitimizes his interim leadership of Agudama, which means that the community needed to manage him, even though you don't like him, because the court has pronounced him the chief of the community. You should manage him. And somehow, in that meeting, they agreed to manage him, because the only condition in which perhaps they could become traditional rulers in that community was for them to manage him work with him for as long as possible, and then go for the elections because you're already 85. So if you're 85%, it means that you must win the election after all. So why being a fool? If you are disobeying him, you are refusing to work with him, when you win, they will also do the same. And so they will be rancorous forever. So I think on that day, they all saw the light, and then so everyone behaved fairly well. The king also looked at the key touchy issues, such as the draft constitution. Some felt that the draft constitution was not as good as it should be. But they were able to know that even the US Constitution till today is being amended, isn't it? First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment, and 14th Amendment, and so on. So there is no perfect constitution. So accept it the way it is. At this moment, you cannot write a new constitution because they are too polarized to do so. So accept it the way it is, and then in a short while, when the community is back on track, you could amend the constitution. So I think that also seemed to have sat properly. He called on them to take a closer look and acknowledge how it contains their painstaking, written down collective will, and how it also served in the effective ousting of the man they didn't want. It was a constitution that also ousted him. So why will you now deny that constitution that has also done some job for you? So I think that also seemed to work. The pending cases at the court, yes. So they went and protested their loss in the High Court. No, they went to the appeal court to protest their loss, and the matter is still pending there. So it was like, okay, you want a new chief? How do you conduct elections when your matter is in the court? Because they call it sub judice. If there is a matter in court, you do not even have to talk about it so seriously. Otherwise, you'll be seen as contempt in the court. So you have to go and withdraw this matter from the court so that you can have elections. And so that also seemed to have worked. And then they were now compelled as well, more or less, not by force, but by reason, that you need to support this interim government and then allow for the processes of peaceful coexistence. And the interim government should also not discriminate against the rest of the community. You must call them consciously, encourage them to be part of you. And if that is done, then of course it means that you can work together. And the community, Ekpetiama Kingdom, has an annual New Yam Festival every June. And this was happening in April, so they had a few months to June. So they were charged to come together in June and be part of the festival for the first time in a long while. And that they also did. In fact, they presented the most colorful outing in that festival in June as a community. In fact, they came in their numbers. Literally, the entire community came. So even the other ones that have always been united became like invisible in the presence of an overwhelming Agudama community. What were the demands that were made of them? The king demanded of them that they should acknowledge and cooperate with the chief. Okay, that I've already said. Yes, the king demanded that he would constitute an unbiased, non-Agudama, but Ekpetiama electoral committee to conduct the Agudama elections when they're able to live in harmony for a while. So they were given a kind of gestation period for 3 months to work together without rancors, without rumors of any fight, of any rancor. And if that happens, then they will be granted an opportunity. But this time the kingdom will essentially midwife their elections and supervise it in an unbiased manner. And to cut a long story short, I think they were all happy at the end of the day. And they left the meeting. Okay, no, then another bit that was made clear was because the ousted chief, before this meeting, when I invited him and spoke with him, after about 3 hours of a rigorous meeting, in his remarks, he said, look, Your Majesty, no one has spoken to him like this. In fact, there are a lot of things he didn't quite understand. Because he could see himself, having a second opportunity of becoming chief if he behaves well. That now he has understood everything. And he's guaranteeing that there will be peace in the community. And so I think he walked away in that understanding. And since then, the community has been more like peaceful. Though the matter in the appeal court is yet to be retrieved, because it's going to be later in November that they will have a session. But essentially, Agudama has been able to have back its peaceful coexistence. And I believe that sometime next year, before the New Yam Festival, the community will return as one whole with a chief that is unanimously elected by the community. I wish to thank you so much for your audience and wait for your questions. Thank you very much.